fairly conservative Christian upbringing, and it was like, wow, women. I mean, and so I discovered that I liked having a social life, and I joined a fraternity, and I was at this little school, and I was spending money. My dad was sending me allowance, but instead of paying my rent for a whole year, I spent the allowance on my social life. And so by the end of my sophomore year, I was pretty deeply in debt, and I was flunking. I was starting to flunk classes, and so I needed money. And I heard that the local funeral home wanted to hire somebody. This is a small Texas town where back then the ambulances were run by funeral homes. Mm. So I just went down and said, "I hear you guys have a job open." They go, "Yeah, you're going to help the mortician embalm bodies. You're going to drive the flower car. You're going to drive the ambulance. Sometimes we'll send you anywhere in Texas to pick up a body, and we'll pay you $60 a month plus room." I said, "I'm in." And they go, "Do you have They said, "Do you have black pants, a white shirt, and a black tie?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Be back at 1 o'clock." Hmm. Oh, and he said, "Do you have any first aid training?" And I said, "Yeah, I have a Boy Scout life-saving, first aid badge." He goes, "Great, you're hired." And so for the next over a year, I worked at this funeral home, driving an ambulance. Pretty serious stuff happened. I was continuing to flunk out. In a desperate bid to save my undergraduate career, I decided to take a whole year of physics at UT Austin. Mm. And so I went to UC Austin, made an F one semester, a D the other semester, and walked out of my physics class when Whitman was shooting from the tower. And so I heard all these gunshots, except I misunderstood them as being firecrackers. So I just blithely walked to my car.
Wow.
Blah, blah, blah. I flunked out. My dad by then was out of the Air Force. He was teaching at Texas Wesleyan. I could go there free. I begged my parents to let me come home and live at home for free. I went back to Fort Worth. I had to make money, so I went to work full time and went to college just 3 days a week. And I sort of had it together by then, so I started making straight A's. First, I worked in this department store selling little boys' suits to little boys' moms, and I was bored to tears. And I knew there was an ambulance company running the ambulance in Fort Worth. So I went down there and said, "Hey, I have a little experience." They go, "Well, you got to have advanced first aid." I go, "I'll be back 2 weeks from now." I went and took a night class in advanced first aid, and you start out as an assistant, I became a driver, blah. So for a year and a half, I drove an ambulance in Fort Worth. Mm. And then I got drafted as a medic. And so I had a lot of experience with violence and death at way too young an age. And then I got out of the Army, and my first lover got murdered. And so by the time I got my PhD and had moved to Berkeley for my first job, I had this stuff in my background. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't really working through it, but I was incredibly fascinated with venomous snakes by then. Mm. And I can see in retrospect that these two things were not unrelated. Mm. So that's the first thing. I think I think it's fair to say I had a rather abnormal experience with violence and death for someone my age. Most people, but by the time they're 27 years old, have not pulled a headless teenager out of a wreck or failed to save a toddler with mouth to mouth or given CPR to 3 dozen people and none of them revive. I don't think that's normal. Yeah. And so, but I grew up in a time in a way that you just didn't talk about it. My mom was a dirt poor farmer's daughter. You don't cry over spilled milk. So there I was, and so as a result of that, I wrote my first book, Snakes, I was trying to start writing about this stuff, and I'm sorry it's such a long story, but
continue.
So I had this idea that I wanted to write about life and death and shit and blood, and I read Norman Maclean's "A River Runs Through It," and I was blown away. I mean, in that story, the title novella, his brother dies in the middle of a paragraph. Like you're reading along and normal things are happening, and about the third sentence in the paragraph, his brother is beaten to death in an alley. Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, that's really something, because that's actually what happens in real life. You pick up the phone, it's your mom, and you think she's inviting you to dinner, and it's to tell you Marcia's been murdered, And so I thought, well, I'm gonna write about this shit, And so I knew somebody who knew Norman Maclean, and it's too long a sidebar, but I ended up having dinner with Norman Maclean a couple of years before he died, when he was in his early 80s. And I thought, well, I'm going to tell Norman about, going into burning buildings and having somebody who stabbed somebody turn on me with a knife, and having to get out of building till the cops got there and all this stuff, you know. And he's going to think it's really cool and tell me how to write my book, you know. Yeah. And Norman was a distinguished English professor at the University of Chicago, but really a cowboy and a forest ranger at heart. Yeah. He was kind of profane at times, and he would just turn to me several times during the dinner. He took me out to dinner at the Chicago Faculty Club. Wow. He'd turn, he'd say, look, why do you want to work with those goddamned old rattlesnakes? Why don't you go write about that? And on the plane back to California, I thought, he's right. I am not ready to write about headless teenagers or murdered lovers. I need to write about things I know about, which is snakes. So I got this idea to write my snake book and to have an introduction to each chapter that would be personal. And the whole book would begin with my dinner with Norman Maclean. And then it would run through every chapter, these little essays that were more personal, and they would end in an epilogue that answered Norman's question, why do you want to work with these goddamn old rattlesnakes? So that's what I did. That's how I did my first book. And then after my first book came out, and it was a critical success, I think it's fair to say. By then I was older, 15 years older. I'd been a lot of places, you know. And so then I decided to write Tracks and Shadows. I was ready to kind of get into it, you know. Sure. So then I spent years writing and researching Tracks and Shadows. You know, I went back and found Marcia's grave. I interviewed her mom. I went and, you know, I kept notes. I tried to recreate in stream of conscious note taking the smells and sounds and sights of being an ambulance driver, and you know, I ended up writing Tracks and Shadows, which I'm proud of. Yeah. So that's much longer than you probably wanted, but that's an earlier thing, and then a more recent thing, which is sort of ellipses back to it. About 2017 or 2018, I had just retired. I lived in Ithaca, New York. I got an email from a man named Bill Branch, and he was, at that time, the most distinguished African herpetologist, William R. Branch. And Bill and I were the same age, and he had come to California once after a meeting, and I had taken him on a 2-week jaunt. And we left Berkeley in my truck, and we drove all around the Southwest, all the way to Dallas, Texas, where I delivered him to Jim Murphy at the Dallas Zoo. And in those 2 weeks, I think I showed Bill something like 7 species of rattlesnakes in the wild and lots of other stuff. And there was lots of listening to Dire Straits and laughing and catching shit and having fun, you know, and herping. And so I really considered him quite a good friend. I subsequently spent time in Namibia with him at a meeting. And so I think it would have had to been I guess it would be the fall of 2018. I always, in our household, I'm the one that wakes up before dawn and makes coffee and feeds the dog, and I have about an hour before Kelly gets up, and I was drinking my coffee, and I opened my email. There's an email from Bill Branch, and it basically says, this is goodbye, I'm dying. I have a rapid onset neuromuscular condition. I'm already paralyzed from the waist down, and I just want to say, your friendship mattered to me, you know. Wow. So I sit there and I think, geez, you know, and I had this immediate thought, you know. So at that point I'm like 70, 71 years old or something like that. And I'm thinking, wow, what if I had only one field trip left? And I immediately actually knew what the answer was. So I've always had kind of a bucket list. There's a lot. I've never been to Australia. Yeah. I've never been to Argentina and Patagonia. But I knew that if I only had one field thing left to do, I wanted to see big elapids in the field, cobras, mambas, things like that. And I love South Africa. I'd already been to South Africa and Namibia several times. And I had a former postdoc who had married while he was a postdoc of mine in New York, and he and his wife moved back to South Africa, and we're doing a study of Cape cobras in the Kalahari. It's still before dawn. I've just read Bill's email, and I write Brian, I go, hey buddy, if I promise you that I'm fit enough to not hold you back physically, if I pay all my expenses, the next time you and Robin are going to Kalahari, can I come along? Because I just got this email from Bill, and my biggest bucket thing in my life is to see big elapids in the field doing their thing. I don't care about catching them. I want to watch them. And I knew Brian was doing this. And literally, still before my wife got up, I got an email from Brian that said, get your Texas ass over here. Wow. That's the exact email. And by the time Kelly got up, I had blocked it out in my mind. This was like in October, November, February. I was going to South Africa, and I was going to go spend almost a month in the Kalahari with Brian and Robin and study these incredible 1.5 meter long, immaculate, golden, kills more people than any other snake in South Africa, Najanivia.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. And it was mind-blowing. I mean, I had made up my mind, as I always do, that if somehow I didn't even see a cobra, I'd still have a great time because I'd never been in the Kalahari.
Yeah.
Blah, blah. And it was a time in the season when it could have been too cold, or, you know. And it turned out these cobras, one of their main prey will nest with openings from the bottom.
Yep.
And one of the ways these cobras forage is to trapline trees with sociable weaver nests and then go up and go in the holes, you know. And so one of the many things Brian had and Robin had going is they had a bunch of cobras with transmitters in them, and they had they had hundreds of sociable weaver nest trees numbered, and then they had this protocol of visiting all these and checking all these telemetred snakes in a very regular way. And so that's what we did for 3 weeks.
Wow.
The very first morning, we went to the very first tree, and they have this long thing with like a telescope with a mirror and a light on it. And so the way they look for cobras, sometimes you can just see the cobra sticking its head out or even hanging out. If you look at my Facebook page today, I reposted pictures from this trip.
Okay.
And so we walk up this first tree, and Brian goes, "Why don't you go on that side and I'll go on the other just to look up." So I walk under this thing, I'm crooked my neck like this, and I blurted out, "It's a fucking cobra." Because I looked up and there was an adult Najanivia, looking just like this at me out of this hole, you know.
Yeah.
And then we caught him, and that was one that didn't have a transmitter, so we had to catch it and process it. It was like a 6-foot-long male.
Wow.
So over the next almost month, we caught some snakes, we processed some snakes, we walked up on telemetred animals and observed them. And interestingly, no one was ever struck at. And in fact, late in the trip, I thought, I'm never going to see one of these things hood. I mean, here I am studying cobras with Brian and Robin. I haven't seen a hood yet. Because it turns out, just like with rattlesnakes, if you're gentle and you're non-threatening, and you follow the rules just like you follow with firearms, they're not dangerous. You know, firearms aren't dangerous as long as you obey about 2 rules. You know, if you look at firearm accidents or venomous snake accidents, I swear, I bet I'm talking about accidents. When somebody accidentally steps on a pit viper, that's different. But accidents are always based on breaking rules by people. So we were following all the rules. Brian and Robin and I are completely committed to not traumatizing snakes and not getting hurt ourselves. And so we never had, and I was thinking, I'm never going to see a cobra hood, you know. And it was the last week, the 3 of us were somewhat spread out. Brian had the receiver, and I just had a snake hook, and I encountered a Cape cobra. And so I sort of herded it under the shade of a tree, and I had it just sort of alert, and I wouldn't let it leave. And eventually, it got so annoyed with me, it stood up into a hood. And I got some incredible, I didn't tell you that by then I had, with binoculars, spotted the surgical scar and suture scars, so I knew it was one of the transmitted animals. I just didn't have a way to know which one until Brian got there with a receiver. I had actually called him on a walkie-talkie and said, I have a cobra in the shade over here. I'm about 300 yards west of you or whatever. And it's telemetred, but I don't know who it was. So eventually he came, we got it. In the meantime, I finally got to photograph one of these magnificent snakes in its head-up thing. You know? So that, you know, I'd have a hard, I can't say what's my favorite species of snake, but Cape cobras are pretty high up.
But that was a moment for you that
God, it happened over and over. One time we were driving down this road, the little dirt road. 2 other things happened. We were driving this little dirt road, and we saw a cobra off to the side of the road, and we were headed to look for this one, and we were getting a signal, and there was a cobra. And so we were just going past it. Brian looked in the rearview mirror and saw that there was a truck coming. So we pulled over. Brian walked around the cobra far enough he didn't disturb it, and stood in the road with his hand up to stop the truck. I have a picture of Robin right in front of me, the cobra crawling undisturbed across the road, Brian with his hand up stopping the lorry, and then the cobra just went on about its business, and we followed it and got pictures. The absolutely most incredible thing was, one day, we got word that 2 of the trackers that worked for the game preserve had seen some snake tracks, and so they walked them up several hundred yards off where they first found them, and there was a Cape cobra trying to subdue a puff adder. And so they took us to where the tracks started, and we followed the tracks several hundred meters, and there was this thing happening. And it played out over the next 30 some hours, which was astonishing.
Wow.
So the cobra would be in hiding some of the time in rodent burrows. We were in a little cluster of trees, brutally hot otherwise. And the cobra would come out every hour or two or few and relocate this envenomed but not dead puff adder. And it would go up to the posterior part of the puff adder, start flicking its tongue, and make little exploratory bites, at which point the puff adder would jerk violently, the cobra would let go, and go back down a hole. And over the next roughly 36 hours, we documented with video and photos that puff adder gradually slid downhill in terms of condition. At one point, while the cobra was out of sight, we actually lifted on a snake hook the puff adder into a little box and weighed her on a scale and put her back down. So now we knew her mass.
Wow.
We estimated the cobra's length and mass. And on the second day, late in the afternoon, we photographed that cobra in a burrow swallowing the puff adder.
Wow.
And there's nothing like this in herpetological literature. This is like when the guy was talking about the copperheads with the cicadas and the strike-induced kimmerer.
Sure.
So
that wasn't known.
What we observed, there's nothing in the literature on snake feeding biology to predict what we saw.
Wow.
And actually there are things about it we still don't understand, but we're writing a paper about it right now. So, I mean, those are the moments if someone like me lives their life you're just spellbound. You can't believe what you're seeing. We're looking at each other once in a while going,
Yeah.
and of course we got tons of photos and videos. And,
Sure. I mean, and the patience, right? Patience and observation. These things are important in terms of.
Yeah.
I mean, that's interesting. You're talking about cobras in the Kalahari. I mean, did that experience inform some of the work you're doing now, looking at the coevolutionary relationship between primates and cobras?
That's a great question, because actually another thing I did on that trip was I went to a place called the Cradle of Mankind. I had a picture of it in my talk the other night. That's where the fossils are of this recently discovered hominidea that is down in this cave. And anyway, South Africa is one of the two main sites for major
How old is that?
That's relatively young, it turns out. I mean, it's in the genus Homo, so it's
it's Homo. Okay, yeah.
But Australopithecus, the type of Australopithecus is Australopithecus africanus, and that's from South Africa. That was discovered in 1932, and I have a cast of the skull of that fossil. So Brian and Robin took me to these incredibly important fossil hominin sites, so I could get to see that. And so forth.
Yeah, so I mean,
it all plays into this thing I'm into now, which is snake human 75 million years of deadly diet.
Well, that's what I mean. I think it's incredible. I mean, I guess a very basic question is why do people have such a visceral reaction to snakes? I mean, in your opinion, why? Well,
I think there's this word anthropologists used a lot, biocultural. And so that sort of sidesteps the question that can be very hard to answer as to what extent are genes underlying this or not. With humans in particular, but I think increasingly we're seeing it like this true of other organisms. Genes and culture are entwined, you know. Each of us is born as an individual with a certain genotype, which plays out in the environment we develop into a certain phenotype, which continues to be modified by experience. So our skin might get darker, our behavioral repertoire might get more diverse than it would be if we weren't a soldier for 3 years or whatever, right? And so that's what I mean by bioculture. By saying we have a biocultural heritage as individuals, as species, and so forth, we're sort of not worrying too much about exactly how that plays out. But we're saying there's this intimate, important relationship between us and the environment, and maybe specific parts of the environment. And I think probably the only thing among the animal world besides primates that has such a profound impact on us is probably big cats. we have a pretty visceral reaction to big cats.
Who would have
or big predators in
who
general.
would have
Big carnivores.
hunted us?
Absolutely.
Specialist hunters of primates. You
Absolutely.
know, right?
Leopards certainly. Leopards eat a lot of primates, including Australopithecus.
And I mean, did you think that it was cobras that we were so attuned to back in that period?
Well, not the origin, because it turns out the origin of even anthropoid, which is monkeys, apes, and us, is older than the Elapidae.
Okay.
So,
okay.
but it's
all right.
not older than Viperidae. So
Okay.
I think
Okay.
vipers were the first front fang group to really affect our evolution.
Okay.
I think the big constrictors like boas and pythons actually affected the origin and early evolution of primates.
Okay.
There was sort of a
All
second
right.
wave of front fang snakes, and then further on with another kind of front fang snakes, the cobras, and it's complicated, but yeah.
Right, but it's. I mean, you were essentially. I mean, you were in the Kalahari with cobras. You know, that's a pretty ancient experience.
Nothing beats watching a cobra in the field actually rise up like this,
right,
and point its head at you and try to empathize with it as well as yourself. You know?
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
It's really amazing.
The third one would be raptors, because it turns out the first specimen of Australopithecus, which is really early on our lineage. So, humans and primates separated as lineages about 7 million years ago. The lineage of primates besides us that survives are the chimps and bonobos, and this lineage, all that survives is us. Mm-hmm. But along the way are a bunch of well-known fossils like Lucy, for example, Neanderthals, for example. That's all in this lineage. Mm-hmm. Well, Lucy is an Australopithecus afarensis from up in the area of Somalia and Ethiopia. Mm-hmm. But that genus Australopithecus, the Australopithecines, was first discovered in South Africa, and the first species of it was Australopithecus africanus. And the type specimen is a skull only with eagle talon punctures in the orbits.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I think we have had a very particular relationship with things that can kill us.
Yep.
That's throughout our history, and I wouldn't know how to explain this neurobiologically, but I bet we have a particular kinds of emotional and fear modules in the brain that are shaped in various ways by the fact that if you live where there's an eagle so big it can eat you,
right,
or a cat so big it can eat your dad,
yep,
or a snake that can eat your whole damn family, man, you're going to pay attention.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are no allowances for sloppy thinking.
Yeah, it's an exacting.
It's an exacting science.
Yes.
A surviving primate when you're up against all that, right?
Yeah.
So I'm fascinated.
Is that kind of where your research is heading, looking at this?
That's what. If I finish another book, it's called Monkeys, Snakes, and Spears: Lucy's Legacy. And I'm going to put into the context of this deadly dialogue our current environmental plight, and how I think how we define wildness affects how we respond to that plight.
Wow.
So I think the traditional, especially in the U.S., way of environmentalists to perceive wildness is it doesn't involve humans. In fact, it's defined by leaving us out of the picture.
Right.
That's what that phrase, take only photographs, leave only footprints. It's like, well, we don't matter. And yet these same people, of which I was one for most of my life, complain about us being apart from nature. My water bottle right over there is from REI. It says, a part of, not apart, which is a great slogan.
Yep.
But in fact, I think environmentalism has mostly kept us apart from.
Right.
So that's what my book's. I'm gonna reach that conclusion by setting us up with the fundamentals of ecology and evolution. Then I'm going to tell the story of snakes. I'm going to tell the story of primates, and then I'm going to take us to what I think this all means in terms of philosophy and environment and conservation.
Awesome.
I don't know if I can do it.
Yeah, you need to.
I don't know if I can. It may be beyond my. What's the thing? His reach is beyond his grasp.
Well, no, it sounds.
I never remember which way that goes, but
it's
quite possible that my grasp is beyond my reach, or my reach. No, I think it would be my reach is beyond my grasp. But it's challenging to try.
I think it sounds like you're on something.
Yeah.
I mean, that actually maybe to wrap things up.
I'm ready.
You probably got to go.
I'm thirsty.
Any kind of parting words for young people young people who want to study and learn about the natural world? And then I guess another question that's separate is I mean, what do you want your legacy to be? What do you want your, like, you know, I don't know if you even think about that, but
Well,
because that's a kind of two separate questions, but
I don't think too much about that. So
Yeah.
I'm a fairly introverted person, although I'm superficially gregarious. I'm a pretty selfish person in that I pretty much do what I want to do, but I try to be kind about it. I'm pretty proud of things I've accomplished as a scientist, and I've got some stuff to show for that. I mean, I'm even prouder, I think, of what I've accomplished as a teacher. So, I mean, Emily Taylor was my undergrad. Rulon Clark was my grad student, and that's just two. And I mean, Emily said about as nice a thing as I can imagine when she heard it. She said, "Harry's a good listener," and so I've always tried to be. I'm not always. I can get real talkative and talk too much, but I really try to be a good listener, and I try to pay attention to what other people want to talk about and why. And I think that's probably helped make me a better teacher. I actually really like people. I like being around people, and I like seeing. I don't have children of my own. I like seeing young people thrive and sort of discover themselves. So I've certainly, Chuck Bowden wrote about this once too. There's a really funny thing. You will remember this, I bet. At some point, Chuck has this thing where he says, you know, people go around saying they wouldn't do anything different. He said, that's crazy. He said, here's a list of 10 things I would do different. And the one I remember, just because I feel the same way, is never again drink cheap wine. Like I would walk away thirsty rather than drink Yellowtail. I mean, I'd rather, you know, it's not that I'm a wine snob, and it's not that I'm well educated about wine, but I do know that there can be better wine and shit wine, and I will never again knowingly consume really bad wine. So that's one. But I have many other regrets, things I've done that were selfish, that were bad judgment, and so on. So of course, and Chuck meant to say, of course there are things I do differently, but I can't say that I regret my life, and I can't say that I will die unhappy. I mean, I find it just like watching Rulon give his talk. It's just, he's such a great guy. I'm so proud of him as a person and as a scientist. And Emily's the same way. I went on Emily's herpetology class field trip the same year I went to the Kalahari. So I went to Kalahari in February. In May of that year, I went to San Luis Obispo, gave a seminar at her school, gave a talk at her and her husband's bar. They sponsored us public speaking, so I gave a public talk at their brew pub. And then I went on Emily's herpetology class field trip with her incredibly enthusiastic students to the same places in the Mojave Desert that I took Emily in 1998, I think.
Wow.
What a trip.
Wow.
And I have never in my life been around more gung-ho, enthusiastic students than Emily's undergrads from San Luis Obispo. I came back home from that trip just beaming, renewed. You know?
Yeah.
So that's what I'd say.
All right.
Good?
All right. That's great.
Okay. Thanks for asking the question.
Thank you so much, Harry.
What do you